iOS 17 is here, whether you're using it for the first time on a brand new iPhone 15 or updating an earlier model. But the most important feature, the killer app for this iOS release, isn't the new standby mode or interactive widgets, it's the ecosystem. More than that, it's the people in that ecosystem. It's the people you care about or the people you might soon meet who also use iOS 17. This might not sound like news if you're familiar with Apple's history of ecosystem lock-in, using that ecosystem and those people as leverage to keep you faithful to the iPhone. The big example, of course, is iMessage in the US, which we'll get to in a little bit. But sprinkled throughout the new iOS 17 are many more or less obvious examples of how Apple's walled garden, or more accurately, the people that you share it with, are going to become the most important feature in iOS going into the mid-2020s. So let's rewind a sec and look at the prototypical example of Apple leveraging its user base in this way, iMessage and FaceTime, which infamously started out as a platform which was supposed to be open source but never actually was. Ultimately, all we eventually got was a web wrapper for us Android nerds to FaceTime with our iPhone owning betters. In internal emails released as part of various legal proceedings, Apple execs have basically admitted that this is because iMessage and FaceTime's lock-in factor just works too well. Granted, not every country really cares about iMessage or FaceTime. Here in Europe, WhatsApp is the ubiquitous platform for those kind of things. In Asia, it's Line or KakaoTalk or WeChat. But in the US, for many, iMessage is synonymous with texting. And because of all the features Apple's added to it over the years, and the deliberately clumsy way that Android users fit into the equation, the fear of losing iMessage is a big part of what keeps many Americans tethered to the Apple ecosystem, even leading to a cottage industry of middleband platforms that aims to ease some of those iMessage pain points for Android people. iOS 17 does improve things a little by addressing the chaos that used to ensue when you added an Android user into an iMessage group chat. It used to turn replies and reactions in particular into an incomprehensible vomit wall of text. That's no longer a thing, but the experience is definitely substandard still compared to texting between iPhones. Now, if I was designing a system to weaponize peer pressure in order to drive iPhone sales, especially among kids and younger people, I'd have a really hard time matching what Apple has done with iMessage here. And what's frustrating to both Google and its customers is that there's a newer texting standard called RCS, which would allow more seamless texting between Android and iPhone, but which Apple refuses to adopt. Again, the reasons why aren't too hard to figure out. As a result, the social stigma accompanying green bubble Android users in the US versus blue bubble iMessage users is real, and a lot of ink has been spilled on that subject already. It reinforces the perception of the iPhone as a status symbol, as it's inevitably the Android user who takes the social flak for any cross-platform texting wonkiness. Why don't you just buy an iPhone is an easier argument than why doesn't Apple just adopt RCS? And it's one Tim Cook himself has parroted when grilled by journalists on the subject. Apple has no incentive to make life any easier for people who want to text between Android and iOS. It works too well as a social pressure point to push people towards the purchase of an iPhone, and it's those green bubble folks who bought an Android phone by mistake who ultimately get the blame. It's a major reason why the iPhone continues to dominate among high school and college-age folks in the US, arguably the kind of people who are most susceptible to peer pressure. Potentially, that is a big problem for Android's long-term market share in the US, which explains why Google is so worried about it. On the other hand, of course, this works great for Apple, and surely nothing short of actual legislation is going to force it to change. Speaking of which, in 2022, the European Union introduced the Digital Markets Act, a wide-ranging law designed to open up big tech and force platform holders to be more interoperable, whether it's the physical ports that they have or the messaging apps that they use. It comes into force in March 2024, and it's a big part of the reason why the iPhone 15 now has a USB-C port instead of Lightning. And eventually it'll probably result in third-party App Store support coming to iOS in some form. We've already got a whole separate video on that if you want to check it out. But the Digital Markets Act also has its sights set on chat apps, and although Apple's lawyers have so far been able to dodge any legal mandate to support RCS, it's probably only a matter of time before the EU is able to force the company, no doubt kicking and screaming, to introduce better cross-platform texting onto the iPhone. If and when that happens, the green bubble might remain, but adding one to your group chats will be considerably easier for everyone involved. So with the possibility of that very powerful iMessage lock-in factor going away, Apple needs more ways to use your social circles, the people you know and the people you might want to know who use iOS, to bring over Android switchers and keep its existing user base happy within that walled garden. And oh boy, does iOS 17 have plenty of features like that. The big one that jumps out at you is Name Drop. This uses NFC, the same technology behind Apple Pay, to swap contact details with another iPhone owner, accompanied by this neat little force field animation thing. Old school Android fans might remember a very similar feature in Android 4.0 Ice Cream Sandwich back in the day, and of course smartphone veterans may also remember the days of swapping contact details over infrared as well. But the way Apple does it is more personal. It's tied to your contact card, which is now fully personalizable and shows up when you call another iPhone-owning friend. Want to bump contacts with an Android owner? You'll need to enter their digits the old-fashioned way. And same deal for calls, you'll just see an ugly, impersonal number flashing up at you. So you might not immediately associate these two features with platform lock-in, but it's a subtle, clever, almost insidious way to make interacting with fellow residents of the walled garden that much more pleasant and joyful than those who inhabit the wilderness outside. Think back to the iMessage peer pressure / bullying controversy once again. Maybe the EU eventually pops that balloon, and Apple, through gritted teeth, adds RCS into its Messages app. But now consider that Gen Alpha types and geriatric Gen Zs in high school right now going into college in the late 2020s will be making friends using Name Drop and having more powerful personal interactions with the people they call or FaceTime thanks to that new contact card. It's not hard to imagine the diminishing number of Android kids in the US feeling just as much peer pressure by being left out of those new experiences. And it goes further with the new AirDrop and SharePlay features. NFC lets iOS 17 initiate AirDrop by tapping two iPhones together, or share a listening experience on Apple Music. You can't do either of those things if the other person owns an Android phone. The common thread running through all this is intimate in-person experiences. With iOS 17, more of the platform lock-in is extended into the real world, whether it's meeting someone new at a party, catching up with an old friend and showing them photos, or sharing your favorite album with your partner. These are all experiences that highlight the Apple ecosystem of the mid-2020s as one of people just as much as it is devices or features. And so even if iMessage itself is forced to open up to RCS, all these extra experiences around the iPhone on iOS 17 will ensure that for iPhone people, the digital interactions they have with fellow iPhone owners are more enjoyable and more meaningful than those outside the walled garden. It won't be quite the same as certain people becoming green bubbles and messing up your group chats, but rather swapping numbers with Android owners or sharing photos with them or knowing who they are when they call all become that bit less enjoyable, and just maybe that subconsciously affects how you might feel about them. Currently, it's the App Store and iMessage that's in the crosshairs of the EU's Digital Markets Act. Those are the big obvious targets that scream platform lock-in, or even monopoly if you want to get all Tim Sweeney about this. But even in a world where the DMA has forced Apple to open up things like FaceTime and iMessage to other platforms, Apple has a formidable backstop of features in iOS 17, things like Name Drop and contact cards, which you could argue also use peer pressure tactics to stop iPhone owners switching away and tempt Android owners into the walled garden through more meaningful connections with the people they care about who use an iPhone. It sure seems like Apple's preparing for a future where it could have a whole lot less control over iMessage, and so doubling down on features like this does make a lot of business sense. Just as with the iMessage question, the morals of this kind of platform lock-in are debatable. Apple's answer famously is to just buy your mom an iPhone. Or rather, from Apple's perspective, it seems the problem isn't interoperability between platforms, but that some people still don't use an iPhone. It remains to be seen whether we'll eventually get to the good future where iMessage's green bubbles and blue bubbles can coexist in peace. But if that time does ever come, iOS 17 shows that Apple is already preparing for the next big social mindshare fight, and recruiting those who might be going to school and using an iPhone today to that cause. That's it for now. If you used any of these features on iOS 17, hit the comments, let me know how you're getting on with them. Do you think they would contribute meaningfully to platform lock-in in the future? Stick around for more iPhone 15 coverage coming very soon, but in the meantime, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.